What kind of son tells his mother, after 50 years of sacrifice, to find your own place? The words stung like a slap, sharp and cold, echoing in the quiet of my kitchen where I'd raised him, fed him, loved him through every scraped knee and broken dream. I stood there, 68 years old, my hands trembling on the countertop, staring at the son I barely recognized. Mark's face was hard, his jaw set, his eyes avoiding mine as he shoved his hands into his pockets. The house, our home for decades, seemed to hold its breath, the walls heavy with memories of laughter, arguments, and the life we'd built. I'd given him everything, every penny, every moment, every tear, and now he stood there demanding I leave. For what? His new wife, Claire, who couldn't stand the sight of me. Or was it something deeper, something I'd missed in the blur of years? I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask how he could forget the woman who'd carried him through life. Instead, I turned away, my heart a knot of betrayal, and walked out into the night, the door clicking shut behind me. The air was crisp, the stars indifferent, and as I stood on the porch, the weight of his words settled into my bones. I wasn't just losing my home, I was losing my son. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the ache of reality. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that screams absence. Mark had left for work, Claire with him, and I was alone with my thoughts. I wandered through the rooms, touching the worn edges of furniture, the photos on the mantel. Mark as a boy, grinning with a missing tooth. Mark at graduation, proud and tall. Mark and me, laughing at some forgotten joke. Each memory was a knife, cutting deeper as I realized how far we drifted. I'd raised him alone after his father left when he was 5, working 2 jobs to keep this roof over our heads. I'd sewn his costumes for school plays, stayed up late helping with math homework, and cheered at every game, even when he didn't make the team. I'd built this life for us, brick by brick, and now he wanted me gone. Claire's influence was obvious. Her sharp comments about space and independence had started months ago, subtle at first, then bolder. But Mark? He'd always been my rock, my reason. How had it come to this? I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold, and replayed the argument. "Mom, you need to find your own place," he'd said, his voice flat, like he was discussing the weather. "Claire and I need to start our life. You can't stay here forever." Forever? I'd never planned to stay forever, but I'd assumed this was our home, not just mine. I'd assumed family meant something. The sting of his words wasn't just about the house. It was the dismissal, the erasure of everything I'd done. I'd given up dreams of my own, travel, art, a life beyond these walls, to give him stability. And now, at 68, when I should be resting, I was being pushed out. I could feel the anger rising, hot and unfamiliar, but beneath it was something sharper, fear. Where would I go? What would I do? I had no savings, no plan, just a pension and a lifetime of memories tied to this house. I walked to the backyard, where the old oak tree still stood, its branches heavy with the weight of years. Mark used to climb it, fearless, calling down to me while I pretended not to worry. I sat on the grass, the earth cool beneath me, and let the memories flood in. There was a time when we were everything to each other, when his laughter filled this yard, when he'd run to me with every triumph and failure. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up, worrying about bills, about his future, about whether I was enough. I'd always been enough, until now. The thought of leaving this house, this life, was unbearable, but staying wasn't an option. Not with Claire's cold stares and Mark's indifference. I needed to decide, not just for me, but for the woman I'd forgotten how to be. I wasn't just a mother. I was Evelyn, and Evelyn deserved more than this. By afternoon, I was at the library, scrolling through real estate listings on a creaky computer. The idea of moving felt like surrender, but I needed to understand my options. Apartments in town were small, expensive, and soulless. Nothing like the warmth of this house. I stumbled across an article about downsizing, about people who sold everything and started over. One story caught my eye. A woman who sold her home and moved to Europe, living simply but freely. The idea was absurd. I'd never even left the country, but it planted a seed. What if I didn't just move out? What if I changed everything? The thought was reckless, thrilling, and terrifying. I closed the browser and drove home, my mind racing. Mark and Claire were still out, and the house felt like a museum of my past. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the mirror, at the lines on my face, the gray in my hair. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Well, had I stopped being Evelyn and become just Mom? That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't beg to stay. I wouldn't fight for a place in a home where I wasn't wanted. If Mark wanted me gone, I'd go, but not to some cramped apartment down the street. I'd go far, somewhere that felt like a dream, somewhere that would force me to remember who I was. I pulled out my laptop and searched for places I'd only seen in magazines. Paris, Rome, Monaco. Monaco. The name alone felt like a dare, a glittering, impossible place where the sea met the sky. I laughed at the absurdity of it, but the idea stuck. I could sell the house, take the money, and start over. Not just move, reinvent. The thought was a spark, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The next week was a blur of action, fueled by a mix of defiance and desperation. I contacted a real estate agent, a brisk woman named Linda who didn't blink when I told her I wanted to sell fast. She walked through the house, noting its charm and potential, but I saw her eyes linger on the dated wallpaper and creaky floors. "It'll sell," she said, "but don't expect a fortune." I didn't care. I wasn't selling for profit. I was selling for freedom. The house was appraised, listed, and within days, strangers were traipsing through my memories, opening cabinets, testing faucets, judging the life I'd built. Each showing felt like an invasion, but I smiled through it, imagining the cliffs of Monaco, the sun on my face, a life unburdened by obligation. Mark noticed the for sale sign when he pulled into the driveway one evening. He stormed inside, Claire trailing behind, her face a mask of irritation. "What the hell, Mom?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to rattle the dishes. "You're selling the house?" Without telling me. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, my back to him, letting his anger crash over me like a wave. "You told me to find my own place," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm doing that." He sputtered, caught off guard, and Claire stepped in, her tone sharp. "This is our home too, Evelyn. You can't just—" I turned, cutting her off. "This is my home," I said, the words cold and clear. "I paid for it. I raised my son in it. You don't get to decide what I do with it." The silence that followed was electric, charged with years of unspoken tension. Mark looked between us, his face torn, but he didn't speak. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The argument didn't end there. Over the next few days, Mark tried to reason with me, his tone softer, almost pleading. "Mom, we can work this out. You don't have to sell. We just need boundaries." Boundaries. The word felt like a slap, a polite way of saying I was in the way. Claire, meanwhile, was relentless, her comments laced with venom. "You're being selfish," she said one night, cornering me in the living room. "You're tearing this family apart." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "Selfish?" I said. "I gave up everything for this family." "What have you given up, Claire?" Her eyes narrowed, but she had no answer. The truth was, she didn't know me. Not the woman who'd worked nights at the diner, who'd painted Mark's bedroom walls blue because it was his favorite color, who'd cried herself to sleep when his father left. She saw me as an obstacle, not a person. Then came the twist, the moment that turned my anger into something sharper. I found a letter in the attic, tucked inside an old box of Mark's childhood things. It was from his father, dated a year after he left us. The words were scrawled in messy handwriting, full of regret and excuses, but one line stopped me cold. "I know you'll be fine with your mom. She's stronger than anyone I've ever known." I sat on the dusty floor, tears streaming down my face, the letter trembling in my hands. I'd spent years hating that man for abandoning us, but here he was, acknowledging what Mark seemed to have forgotten, my strength. It wasn't just a memory, it was a reminder. I was Evelyn, not just Mom, And I was stronger than this betrayal, stronger than this house, stronger than the pain of being pushed out. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket, a talisman against the doubt creeping in. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple, newlyweds with bright eyes and big plans, made an offer above asking. I accepted without hesitation, ignoring Mark's protests and Claire's glares. The closing date was set, and I started packing, each box a step toward something new. I didn't tell Mark where I was going. Not yet. Let him wonder, I thought. Let him feel the weight of my absence. I researched Monaco, its glittering coast, its promise of reinvention. It was absurd, a retired widow in a place known for wealth and glamour, but the absurdity was the point. I wasn't just leaving, I was choosing myself. I contacted a lawyer to handle the sale, a financial advisor to manage the proceeds, and a travel agent who didn't laugh when I said I wanted to retire abroad. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of the woman I'd lost. One night, as I packed the last of my clothes, Mark knocked on my bedroom door. His face was pale, his eyes tired. "Mom, can we talk?" he said, his voice softer than it had been in weeks. I nodded, bracing myself. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking around at the half-empty room. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. Claire and I, we're trying to build something. I thought you'd understand." I wanted to scream that I did understand, too well. I understood that he'd chosen her comfort over mine, her future over my past. But I didn't say it. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy I'd raised, the man I loved, and the stranger he'd become. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to live." He didn't respond, but the weight of his silence told me he heard me. For the first time, I felt like I was winning, not just against him, but against the version of myself that had settled for less. The closing day arrived like a storm, heavy with anticipation and dread. The lawyer's office was sterile, all glass and sharp angles, a stark contrast to the warmth of the home I was leaving behind. I sat across from the buyers, their excitement palpable, while Mark and Claire sat in the corner, silent and tense. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of what was being lost and gained. I signed the papers, my hand steady, though my heart raced. Each signature was a release, a cutting of ties, a step towards something unknown. When it was done, the lawyer handed me a check, the sum larger than I'd expected, a fortune built from decades of sacrifice. I tucked it into my purse, avoiding Mark's eyes. He hadn't spoken all morning, but I could feel his gaze, heavy with regret or anger. I couldn't tell which. Outside, the new owners drove off, their laughter echoing as they planned their future in my past. Mark lingered by the car, Claire beside him, her arms crossed. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally, his voice low. "We could have figured it out." I looked at him, at the man who'd once been my entire world, and felt a pang of love mixed with resolve. "Mark," I said, "you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Claire opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "This isn't about you," I said, my voice sharp. "It's about me." For the first time, she looked away, and I felt a small victory. I drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, a chapter closing with every mile. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I booked a one-way ticket to Monaco, found a small apartment overlooking the Mediterranean, and started learning basic French. The logistics were daunting: visas, bank accounts, movers, but each task was a brick in the new life I was building. I didn't tell Mark where I was going, not out of spite, but because I needed this to be mine. I needed to prove I could do it alone. The letter from his father stayed in my pocket, a reminder of my strength, a talisman against the moments of doubt that crept in at night. I'd lie awake, wondering if I was crazy, if 68 was too old to start over, if Monaco was a dream too big for a woman like me. But then I'd think of the alternative, staying, shrinking, fading into the background of someone else's life, and I'd push forward. The day before my flight, Mark showed up at the hotel where I was staying. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I let him in, and we sat in silence for a long time, the weight of our history filling the space between us. He told me about Claire, about her pressure to start fresh, about his own fears of failing her. He admitted he'd been wrong, that he'd let her drive a wedge between us. "I don't want to lose you," he said, and the words broke something in me. I wanted to forgive him, to pull him close like I had when he was a boy, but I couldn't. "Not yet. You didn't lose me," I said, "but you pushed me away, and now I'm choosing myself." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw the boy I'd raised, not the man who'd hurt me. That night, I packed my bags, the letter still in my pocket. I thought about the confrontation in the lawyer's office, the moment I'd signed away the house, the look on Mark's face as he realized it was real. It was the climax of our story, the point where everything shifted. I'd stood my ground, not just against him, but against the life that had defined me. I wasn't just selling a house. I was reclaiming my future. The twist, the letter from his father, had given me the clarity I needed, but this moment, this choice was mine. I felt a surge of pride, mixed with grief, as I zipped my suitcase. I was leaving, but I wasn't running. I was choosing. The flight to Monaco was long, the plane humming with the promise of a new beginning. I looked out the window, the ocean below a deep, endless blue, and felt a strange calm. I wasn't the woman who'd stood trembling in her kitchen, betrayed by her son. I was Evelyn, starting over, chasing a dream that felt both impossible and inevitable. When I landed, the air was warm, scented with salt and flowers, and the city sparkled like a jewel against the sea. My apartment was small, but the view was breathtaking, cliffs and waves and sky that seemed to go on forever. I stood on the balcony, the letter in my hand, and let the wind carry away the last of my doubts. This was my place, my life, my story. Monaco was everything and nothing like I'd imagined. The streets were alive with color, the buildings gleaming under the sun, the sea a constant, shimmering presence. But it was also overwhelming. Language barriers, unfamiliar customs, the sheer extravagance of a place built for the wealthy. I was a retired widow from a small American town, and here I was, navigating cobblestone streets alongside millionaires. At first, I felt like an imposter, my simple dresses and sensible shoes out of place among the designer heels and tailored suits. But I reminded myself why I was here, not to fit in, but to find myself. I enrolled in a French class, joined a local art group, and started walking the coast every morning, letting the rhythm of the waves steady my nerves. Each step was a declaration. I am here. I am enough. The first few months were a dance of discovery and doubt. I'd sit in cafes, sketching the harbor, my hands remembering the artist I'd once dreamed of being. I made friends, Marie, a French retiree with a wicked sense of humor, Luca, an Italian painter who saw beauty in my hesitance. They welcomed me, not as Mark's mom or the widow, but as Evelyn, a woman with stories and dreams of her own. Yet at night, the loneliness crept in. I'd think of Mark, of the house, of the life I'd left behind. I checked my phone, hoping for a message, but there was nothing. He hadn't reached out since our last talk, and the silence was a wound that wouldn't heal. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I'd burned a bridge I couldn't rebuild. But then I'd step onto my balcony, see the stars reflected on the water, and remember, I chose this. One evening, at an art gallery opening, I met a woman named Isabel, a Monegasque native with kind eyes and a story not unlike mine. She'd left a controlling marriage, sold everything, and started over in her 50s. "It's not about running away," she told me, her voice warm over a glass of wine. "It's about running towards something." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that this wasn't just escape, it was purpose. I started painting again, not just sketches, but bold, vibrant canvases that captured the sea, the cliffs, the light. My work was raw, unpolished, but it was mine. Luca encouraged me, entering one of my pieces in a local exhibition. When it sold, I cried, not for the money, but for the validation. I was creating, living, becoming. Back in the States, Mark was unraveling. I didn't know it then, but Claire's demands had grown, her need for control straining their marriage. He'd call occasionally, his voice heavy with regret, but I kept the conversation short. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully. The letter from his father was still in my drawer, a reminder of my strength, but also of the pain of being forgotten. I wanted Mark to see me, not as the mother he'd pushed away, but as the woman I was becoming. I sent him a photo of my painting, the one that sold, with a simple note, "I'm finding my place." He didn't respond, but I didn't need him to. I was building something new, something that didn't depend on his approval. The collapse came unexpectedly. One morning, as I sipped coffee on my balcony, my phone rang. It was Mark, his voice raw, broken. "Mom, she's gone," he said. Claire left. I listened as he poured out the story. Her ultimatums, her anger, his realization that he'd lost more than just me. He tried to hold on to her, to build the life she wanted, but it wasn't enough. "I was wrong," he said, tears choking his words. "About everything. I wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was grief, for him, for us, for the years we couldn't get back." I told him to come to Monaco, to see me, to see what I'd built. He hesitated, then agreed. The call ended, and I stood on the balcony, the sea stretching out before me, and cried. Not for the house, not for Claire, but for the boy I'd raised and the man he might still become. When Mark arrived, he looked older, worn, but there was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. We walked the streets of Monaco, the sun warm on our faces, and talked. Not as mother and son, but as two people trying to understand each other. He told me about his regrets, his fears, his hope to rebuild. I told him about my paintings, my friends, the life I'd found. We stood at the edge of the cliff, the sea crashing below, and I felt the weight of our past lift just a little. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, and the words were a balm, healing wounds I hadn't realized were still open. I didn't need his pride, but I wanted it, and that was enough. Life in Monaco settled into a rhythm, a delicate balance of routine and discovery. I painted every morning, my brushstrokes bolder with each canvas, capturing the light that danced on the water. Marie and Luca became my anchors, their laughter and stories filling the spaces where loneliness once lingered. I joined a book club, learned to cook bouillabaisse, and even tried my hand at sailing, laughing as I fumbled with the ropes. Each day was a step further from the woman who'd stood trembling in her kitchen, betrayed by her son. I was Evelyn, not just a mother, not just a widow, but a woman with a life that sparkled like the sea outside my window. Yet, Mark's visit lingered in my mind, a reminder that love, even when broken, doesn't vanish. It waits. Mark stayed for a week, and we rebuilt something fragile but real. He wandered my apartment, touching the paintings, the books, the small treasures I'd collected. "This is you," he said one evening, his voice soft as we sat on the balcony. I forgot that. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He told me about his plans, therapy, a new job, a fresh start. He didn't ask me to come back, and I didn't offer. This was my place now, my home, and he understood. When he left, we hugged, and I felt the boy I'd raised in his arms, the man he was becoming in his tears. "I'll visit," he promised, and I believed him. As his plane took off, I stood on the cliff, the wind in my hair, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The exhibition came a few months later, a local event showcasing artists from across the region. My painting, a vibrant seascape, all blues and golds, was chosen as the centerpiece. I stood in the gallery, surrounded by strangers who saw me as an artist, not a mother or a widow. Marie squeezed my hand, Luca raised a glass, and I felt a swell of pride. This was my life, built from the ashes of betrayal, from the courage to choose myself. I thought of the letter, still in my drawer, and realized I didn't need it anymore. My strength wasn't in those words. It was in me, in the life I'd created, in the woman I'd become. Mark called regularly now, his voice lighter each time. He was healing, finding his way, and our conversations were a bridge between our worlds. He sent me a photo of him at the old oak tree, the one in our backyard, now someone else's. "I miss it," he said, and I knew he meant more than the house. I missed it too, but not enough to go back. Monaco was my home, my canvas, my second chance. I painted it all: the sea, the cliffs, the light, and each stroke was a declaration of who I was, who I'd always been. One evening, as I walked along the harbor, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, I thought about the journey that brought me here. The shock of Mark's words, the pain of his betrayal, the strength I'd found in a forgotten letter, the courage to sell the house, the leap to a new life. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about arriving. I'd lost a home, a son, a version of myself, but I'd gained something greater: the freedom to be Evelyn, unapologetically, fully, fiercely. I stopped, the waves lapping at the shore, and smiled. This was my place, my story, my triumph. The years ahead stretched out like the sea, vast and full of possibility. I'd paint, I'd love, I'd live, not for anyone else but for me. And when Mark visited, as I knew he would, I'd show him the woman I'd become, the life I'd built, the legacy of a mother who refused to fade. The stars came out, one by one, and I stood there, whole, unbroken, alive. This was my Monaco, my reinvention, my heart. And it was enough. End. The story's heart pulsed most vividly in that lawyer's office, where the air crackled with tension and the weight of a lifetime hung in the balance. Picture a wide-angle shot, raw and unfiltered, capturing the sterile room bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Evelyn sits at the center of a sleek glass table, her hands steady as she signs the papers, her face a mask of resolve tinged with grief. Mark is in the corner, his jaw tight, eyes flickering with regret he can't voice. Claire stands beside him, arms crossed, her cold stare cutting through the room like a blade. The buyers, a young couple, sit opposite Evelyn, their excitement a stark contrast to the fracturing family behind them. The camera pans slowly, catching the glint of the pen, the tremble in Mark's hand, the way Evelyn's shoulders square as she makes her choice. Outside, through a wide window, the for sale sign sways in the breeze, a silent witness to the unraveling. Scrawled on the glass, in bold, weathered letters, is the phrase, "A mother's choice." It's etched as if by time itself, natural and unobtrusive, yet impossible to ignore, framing the conflict with raw, human weight. The scene hums with unspoken words, a family breaking and rebuilding in the same breath. Every glance a story, every signature a turning point. The move to Monaco wasn't just a change of scenery. It was a rebirth, a shedding of the skin I'd worn for decades. Every morning, I woke to the sound of the sea, its rhythm a reminder that life moves forward, even when you think it's over. I'd walk to the market, my basket swinging, greeting shopkeepers in my halting French. They'd smile, patient with my mistakes, and I'd feel a small victory in every exchange. My apartment was modest, but the view was a masterpiece. Cliffs plunging into the Mediterranean, the water a kaleidoscope of blues. I'd stand on my balcony, coffee in hand, and let the vastness of it all sink in. This was mine, not because I'd earned it through sacrifice, but because I'd chosen it through courage. Painting became my language, a way to speak when words failed. My canvases were bold, messy, alive, reflections of the sea, the sky, the woman I was becoming. Luca would critique them, his eyes twinkling as he pointed out flaws and brilliance in equal measure. Marie would bring wine, and we'd sit in my tiny living room, laughing about life, love, and the absurdity of starting over. They didn't know the Evelyn who'd raised a son alone, who'd scrubbed floors to pay the bills, who'd cried herself to sleep. They knew the Evelyn who painted, who laughed, who lived. And I loved her, this woman I'd forgotten how to be. Mark's calls became more frequent, each one a step toward reconciliation. He'd tell me about his new job, his therapy, the way he was learning to stand on his own. I'd tell him about my paintings, my walks, the way the light in Monaco felt like a gift. We were finding each other again, not as mother and son, but as equals, two people who'd hurt and healed in their own ways. I sent him a small painting, a seascape with a single figure standing on a cliff, looking out at the horizon. "That's you," I wrote, and he called me, his voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful, Mom," he said, and I knew he meant more than the painting. The exhibition was a milestone, not just for my art, but for my heart. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by people who saw me as an artist, I felt whole. My painting hung in the center, its colors vibrant, its story raw. I thought of the house, the oak tree, the letter from man who'd left but saw my strength. I thought of Mark, of the pain we'd caused each other, of the love that endured. I thought of Claire, a shadow now, a lesson in boundaries and self-worth. I'd lost so much, but I'd gained more, a life, a purpose, a name. Evelyn. As the years unfolded, I painted more, loved more, lived more. Monaco became my home, not just a place, but a state of being. I'd walk the cliffs, the wind in my hair, and feel the weight of my past fall away. I was no longer the woman who'd trembled in her kitchen, no longer the mother defined by sacrifice. I was Evelyn, artist, dreamer, survivor. Mark visited again, and we stood together on the cliff, the sea stretching out before us. "You did it, Mom," he said, and I smiled, knowing he was right. I found my place, not just in Monaco, but in myself. And that was enough.